What if fear isn't something you're born without, but something you simply never have time to learn? Somewhere in the world tonight, a child is being told to be careful, told to hold back, told the stage is too big, the moment too important, the stakes too high to take a risk. Most of us are raised this way. We are taught, slowly, patiently, sometimes lovingly, to be afraid. But what if there's a place where that lesson never arrives? A place where the ball comes to you cracked and half flat, where the pitch is a strip of broken concrete between two parked cars, where the only rule is, if you hesitate, you lose the ball, and if you lose the ball too many times, you don't play at all. At 17 years and 1 day old, a boy walked out onto the biggest stage in European football and looked completely unbothered by it. At 19, he lifted the World Cup. In between, the whole world tried to answer one question about him, over and over, in every language. How does he do this without ever looking afraid? The answer doesn't begin in a stadium. It begins on a street the tourists never see, in a neighborhood most of Barcelona tries to forget, in a home where some months the rent didn't get paid on time. This is the story of that street, and the boy who carried it all the way to the top of the world. Forget the crowds, forget the trophies, forget for a moment that you already know how this story ends. Picture instead a narrow strip of pavement in Rocafonda, a working-class corner of Mataró, 30 kilometers up the coast from Barcelona. The buildings here are close together and a little tired. Laundry hangs from balconies. The postal code ends in 3 numbers, 304. Nobody outside the neighborhood pays those numbers any attention. Not yet. This is a place built by people who came from somewhere else. Families from Morocco, families from Senegal, from Ecuador, from a dozen countries whose names get shortened on paperwork and whose stories rarely make the news, until sometimes they do. It is a place where, every so often, in the gray hours of early morning, a family's belongings appear on the pavement outside their door, because the rent could not be found this month. It is not, by any conventional measure, a place that produces champions. And yet on those cracked streets, between 2 parked cars that served as goalposts, a small boy is playing football. He is younger than almost everyone else on the pitch. He is smaller than almost everyone else on the pitch, and he keeps getting knocked down. He also keeps getting back up, smiling. Nobody in Rocafonda in those years was thinking about Camp Nou, or European Championships, or World Cup finals in New Jersey. They were thinking about the electricity bill, about finding work, about getting through the week. Greatness, if it was coming, was not going to arrive with fanfare. It was going to arrive quietly, disguised as a boy who simply refused to stop playing. There is a reason we begin here and not at the trophy ceremony, because everything this boy would later be, the calm, the smile under pressure, the total absence of fear on the largest stages in the sport, was built here first, on a street most of the world will never think to visit. But before any of that could happen, something had to be broken first. Every story about fearlessness is, underneath, a story about what should have created fear and didn't. Lamine Yamal Nasraoui Abana was born on the 13th of July 2007 in Esplugues de Llobregat, just outside Barcelona. His father, Munir Nasraoui, had come to Spain from Morocco as a child. His mother, Sheila Abana, traced her roots to Equatorial Guinea. 2 families, 2 continents, 1 small apartment, and not very much money. Before he could form his first memory, this boy's family was already living the story that would eventually shape him. Around the time he was born, his parents were struggling to make rent. 2 neighbors stepped in to help, not with advice, not with sympathy, but with money, quietly, the way people who understand hardship tend to help each other. Their names, according to his family, were Lamine and Yamal. His parents never forgot it. When it came time to name their son, they didn't choose a name that sounded strong, or a name that honored a footballer, or a name that carried any grand ambition at all. They chose the names of the 2 ordinary men who had helped them survive a hard month. A debt of gratitude, folded permanently into a birth certificate. Then, when Lamine was around 3 years old, his parents separated. His mother moved to Granollers. His father and his grandmother stayed behind in Rocafonda. From that point on, the boy's childhood would be split between two towns, two households, two versions of home. It is tempting to skip past a detail like this. A separation, a shuttle between two houses. It happens to millions of children, and most of them do not become footballers who terrify defenders for a living. But something about that instability, about growing up without a single fixed center of gravity, seems to have taught Lamine something most children never learn until much later, if they learn it at all. That home isn't a building. It's the people who show up for you. His grandmother showed up. His father showed up. And Rocafonda, cracked, poor, unglamorous Rocafonda, showed up too, every single day, in the form of a football and a stretch of pavement. If the separation was the wound, the street was about to become the medicine. And it would teach him something no coach, no academy, and no amount of money could ever install in a player from scratch. Here is what people mean when they say a player learned the game on the street. And here is what they usually leave out. On a professional pitch, a player has time, space, protection, rules that are enforced, coaches who intervene, medical staff on standby. On the streets of Rocafonda, a small boy playing against teenagers twice his size had none of that. He had a half-deflated ball, two parked cars for goalposts, and older, stronger kids who were not interested in taking it easy on him. They kicked him. They shoved him off the ball. They laughed when he went down. He got up, and he smiled. This wasn't bravado. It was survival. On a street pitch, hesitation is a luxury nobody can afford. If you flinch, you lose the ball. If you sulk, nobody passes to you again. If you cry, you go home, and then you have nothing to do. Because in a neighborhood like Rocafonda, the game in the street isn't a hobby. For a lot of kids, it's the whole afternoon, the whole identity, the whole escape. So the boy learned to think fast, because there was no time to think slow. He learned to take the hit and keep moving, because stopping meant losing everything. And, almost by accident, he learned the one skill that would later leave grown professionals looking bewildered on the biggest stages in the world. Composure under contact, in tight spaces, with no fear of the consequences. This is the secret advantage that no academy can manufacture from scratch. Talent, technique, vision. Barcelona could refine all of that later. But the fearlessness, the specific, stubborn refusal to be intimidated by bigger, older, stronger opposition, that came from Rocafonda. That came from being small on a street that did not make allowances for being small. He didn't know it yet, kicking a worn-out ball between two parked cars. But he was training for Camp Nou. He was training for Munich. He was training for a stadium in New Jersey that, in the summer of 2007, didn't even exist yet in its current form. All he needed now was for someone with real power in the sport to notice. Every great story has a moment where someone with almost no reason to pay attention pays attention anyway. Lamine arrived at La Masia, Barcelona's famous youth academy, at around 6 or 7 years old. On the day of his trial, he realized, or his family realized, that he had forgotten his boots. A coach found him an old, oversized pair to borrow. They were too big for his feet. He laced them up anyway, walked out onto the pitch, and said nothing about it. Then he touched the ball. Coaches who were there that day still talk about it. Whatever it was he had, instinct, timing, a strange, easy fearlessness that most children his age simply didn't possess, it wasn't something that had been taught to him. It looked, to more than one experienced eye, like something he'd built himself, on a surface far rougher than the manicured grass of a Barcelona training pitch. There's a particular kind of belief that changes a child's life. Not loud encouragement, but quiet, professional certainty. The sense, radiating from an adult who has seen thousands of children try out and fail, that this one is different. Barcelona's academy staff had that certainty about the small boy in the borrowed boots. They didn't need him to prove it twice. And so, without fireworks, without headlines, without anyone in Rocafonda quite grasping what was beginning, Lamine Yamal became a La Masia player. One more talented kid in a pipeline that has produced some of the greatest footballers alive. A pipeline that had, a decade and a half earlier, produced a different small boy from a different modest background, a boy named Lionel Messi. Nobody made that comparison out loud yet, but the ghost of it was already in the room. Because, and this part of the story very nearly stayed hidden for 16 years, the two boys had, in fact, already met. In 2007, the same year Lamine was born, a young mother brought her 6-month-old son into a room inside Camp Nou to meet Lionel Messi, then 20 years old and already the most talked-about young player in the world. Messi, by his own account rarely at ease around babies, held the child for a photograph. Nobody in that room understood what the picture would eventually mean. It was filed away, quite literally kept out of public view by the boy's father, who didn't want his son compared to anyone before he'd had the chance to become himself. The photograph stayed hidden for 16 years. It only surfaced in the summer of 2024, once its subject no longer needed an introduction. But long before that photograph resurfaced, the comparisons had already begun anyway, because the boy in the borrowed boots kept getting better, kept getting noticed, kept climbing through Barcelona's youth ranks faster than anyone around him expected. Then, on the 29th of April 2023, at Camp Nou, with Barcelona already leading Real Betis by 4 goals, the fourth official's board lit up. A number, a name. 15 years, 9 months, 16 days old, the youngest player to appear for Barcelona's first team in over a century. The boy jogged onto the pitch like it was Rocafonda. He didn't look overwhelmed, he didn't look rushed. He looked around once, found his position, and got on with it. His head coach, Xavi Hernandez, a man who had lived through the club's greatest era and understood exactly how rare real fearlessness is, said afterwards that he'd told the boy to go out and try things. And the boy had simply done it, without hesitation, as though trying things in front of 80,000 people was no different from trying things on a cracked pavement in front of nobody at all. Barcelona, at that moment, badly needed a reason to believe again. Messi had left the club in 2021. The trophies had slowed. The academy kept producing hopefuls, and the same question kept following each of them like a shadow. Are you the next Messi? Lamine's answer, every time, was almost disappointingly calm. He wasn't comparing himself to anyone, he just wanted to play. He was about to be given a much bigger stage to prove it on. Fame, for most people, arrives gradually. For Lamine Yamal, it arrived like a door being kicked open. In September 2023, Spain's senior national team called him up. Not the under-19, not the under-21, the actual senior side, at 16 years old. His full debut came against Georgia, and in the 74th minute, a cross came in from the left. He didn't rush it. He waited, picked his moment, and finished into the top corner. 16 years and 57 days old, the youngest goal scorer in the history of the Spanish national team, breaking a record that had belonged, until that evening, to his own Barcelona teammate. His teammates lifted him into the air like he was the little brother of the squad. In a way, he was. By the summer of 2024, at the European Championship in Germany, he wasn't just a promising teenager anymore. He was a starter for a Spanish side that few people outside the country expected to win anything. Every match, the pressure compounded. Every match, the cameras looked for the crack in his composure. It never came. This is where the psychological center of Lamine's story sharpens into focus. Most players his age, thrown this early into this much scrutiny, would show some sign of strain, a nervous touch, a reluctance to take responsibility, a flash of frustration when things went wrong. Lamine's teammates and coaches kept describing the same thing, tournament after tournament. He simply didn't seem to carry the fear that everyone assumed should be there. Back home, in a small kitchen in Rocafonda, his father watched every match on television. On the same cracked square where his son had once played between 2 parked cars, neighbors gathered to watch together, the whole street holding its breath for a boy who, on screen, didn't look like he was holding his breath at all. The world was about to find out exactly how far that calm could carry him, against the best team left in the tournament. Munich. The 9th of July, 2024. The semi-final of the European Championship, Spain against France. France were the kind of opponent that ends fairy tales, a defense built like a fortress, and on the counterattack, Kylian Mbappé, one of the fastest men in world football. In the 9th minute, France scored. The stadium noise dipped, just slightly, the particular hush of a crowd recalibrating its hopes downward. 12 minutes later, the ball found its way to the right side, into space, into the one pair of feet in that stadium who had spent his childhood believing that space was always an opportunity and never a threat. Lamine received it 25 meters out. 2 French defenders were already closing the gap. He didn't panic. He cut inside onto his left foot, the same movement that a generation of Barcelona wingers had made famous before him. He looked up. He struck the ball. For a moment, everything in that stadium seemed to slow down. The ball rose and curled, bending away from the goalkeeper's outstretched hand, catching the underside of the crossbar's far corner before dropping into the net. Mike Maignan, one of the finest goalkeepers alive, got fingertips to it and still couldn't stop it. 16 years and 362 days old, the youngest goal scorer in the history of the European Championship, a record that had stood since 1958, since a teenager named Pelé had first announced himself to the world at a World Cup in Sweden. 66 years, broken in the time it takes a ball to travel from a boot to a net. Spain won. 5 days later, in Berlin, at 17 years and 1 day old, Lamine became the youngest player ever to appear in a major international football final. Spain beat England 2-1. He was named Young Player of the Tournament. And in the middle of the celebration, fireworks overhead, a trophy above his head, cameras flashing from every direction, he did something that had nothing to do with any of it. He held up his fingers and formed a number, 304, the postal code of Rocafonda. A boy who had just conquered Europe, reaching back, in front of the entire continent, to touch the street that made him. That gesture is the whole documentary in miniature. Not a celebration for the crowd, a message to the neighborhood. 2 years after Berlin, in the summer of 2026, football's biggest tournament finally arrived on American soil, and it arrived with Lamine Yamal, now 19, as one of its central characters. The road wasn't smooth. He entered the tournament having battled a recurring groin injury for months, not at full fitness, carrying real doubt for the first time in his short career about whether his body could match his fearlessness. He opened his account against Saudi Arabia, breaking through with a goal just minutes into that match. Against France in the semi-final, fittingly, the same opponent from Munich 2 years earlier, Spain came through a tense, controlled contest to book their place in the final, on the eve of Lamine's 19th birthday. Then came the 19th of July, 2026, East Rutherford, New Jersey, the World Cup final, Spain against Argentina. It was the kind of stage that swallows careers whole. Argentina, the defending champions. A stadium built for spectacle, cameras from every nation on earth, the weight of an entire country's hope resting, in part, on the shoulders of a teenager who, less than 3 years earlier, had still been walking home to Rocafonda after school. Spain won it, 1-0. When the final whistle blew, Lamine didn't need to say much. He posted a short message afterward, calling the World Cup nearly the last piece of a growing collection. Euro 2024 already behind him, now the World Cup beside it. At just 19, he had done what players spend entire careers chasing and never reach. But the moment that lingers isn't the trophy lift. It's what came after. Video from the stands of his 3-year-old brother Kane jumping up and down in celebration, and Lamine's face softening at the sight of it. He has said, plainly, that his little brother feels like a son to him. The same boy who once got knocked down on a cracked Rocafonda pavement and got back up smiling is now a world champion, standing in a stadium in New Jersey, thinking about a 3-year-old back home. In Rocafonda today, someone has painted a message on a wall: more Lamine Yamals and fewer evictions. It is not a slogan about football. It's a wish, painted by people who know exactly what it took to produce one boy who made it out, and who would rather the neighborhood simply stop needing anyone to make it out at all. He still goes back. He still visits his grandmother, and every time he scores, his fingers still form the same 3 numbers. So, why does pressure never seem to frighten him? Not because he was born different from the rest of us. Not because some rare gene spared him the fear that grips everybody else standing where he stood. He was frightened, almost certainly, by things far more ordinary than a football stadium, an empty fridge, a missed rent payment, a family splitting into 2 households before he was old enough to understand why. What he learned, on a strip of broken pavement between 2 parked cars, is something worth carrying far beyond football. Fear rarely disappears because you've become fearless. It disappears because you've already survived something that mattered more than the thing in front of you now. Once you've been the smallest kid on the street, knocked down again and again, and gotten up anyway because there was nowhere else to go, a stadium, however enormous, stops looking like a threat. It starts looking like just another pitch. You probably don't have a street like Rocafonda, but you have something like it. A place, a person, a hard season of your life that taught you how to get back up before anyone was watching or applauding. That is your 304. Carry it with you the way he does into whatever stadium your life puts in front of you next. Because the stadium was never the point. The getting up was.